2008 saw a crisis of confidence not only in the global financial system but also in the ratings agencies who, in the aftermath of the crisis, were accused of not doing their jobs properly. Have they restored their credibility? Who actually regulates them? How do these things work? In Johannesburg, Marc Joffe, who is the Chief Executive of Global Credit Ratings, and in Cape Town with me, Nerina, Visser, who's wearing the hat of the Chartered Financial Analysts Society board member this evening. Well, it's not really a hat, Nerina, but it's a very nice new Charlie's hairdo. Give me a sense of it, please. Have the ratings agencies restored their credibility?
I think to some extent, yes. And I think maybe it's also just fair to acknowledge that I think some of the criticism that was levelled against them was unfair. But I think if we go back and say what was really the purpose of a credit rating agency, what was the job that they were supposed to do, it really is about assessing the probability that a debt issuer or a credit issuer has the ability to pay back the loan. That's in essence what they're supposed to do.
But
of course,
they didn't do that.
Well, it goes across a whole range of different product types. So you've got on the one hand sovereign credit ratings, for example, and then all the way through to maybe individual structured products, which might be issued by an issuer that might be credit worthy, but the actual product itself might not be that credit worthy. And I think that's where the lines got very blurred. I think their ability to assess institutions or product providers, I think, was great. I think maybe the assessment of specific instruments is really where a lot of the criticism fairly came from during in the aftermath of 2008.
Marc Joffe, does the industry work better today than it did 6-7 years ago?
To my mind, it works significantly better, Bruce. I think the criticism levelled during the 2008-2009 crisis is to some degree justified. I think from the perspective of the South African market, however, I think one needs to look at that this was largely an international issue. It was very limited in terms of the South African context. So from a rating agency perspective, from global credit ratings perspective, obviously we're associated with that perception issue, but I think it's important just to clarify that it was largely an international issue in terms of these exotic products that were accorded ratings relative to the South African context, where that was not really the case. A lot has happened since, and post-2008 regulatory requirements have been imposed, and particularly in the South African market. I'm not sure if you're aware that the South African rating agencies, of which there are 4, are now required to be licensed by the Financial Services Board in terms of a Credit Rating Services Act of 2012. The alignment of this act is
what does that do, Marc Joffe, though, to independence of the ratings agencies? Because on the one hand, you want some regulation. On the other hand, you want unfettered independence so that you can make the tough calls if and when those calls need to be made.
I think on the one hand, it's placed a huge administrative workload on us, but from another perspective, and more importantly, it actually holds rating agencies accountable. Accountable to the perspective that even the board of directors, should the rating agency have undertaken gross negligence or overlooked something hugely important, there's actually ramifications, and that ranges from fines to potentially jail term. So it's changed fundamentally from that perspective. Agencies are now required to have a full-time compliance officer on the ground who's basically the eyes and ears of the Financial Services Board. They interact with the FSB on a regular basis. They also have a direct reporting line to the board of directors of rating agencies. So it's a lot more transparent, the process, and there's significant oversight just in terms of what we do on a day-to-day operation.
Okay, so we tick all the boxes, Nerina, but does it make the job of the rating agencies, their role to act as, I guess, a barometer for credit markets around the world, does it make them better at that job, or does it simply make them better at filling in forms?
No, I think it does make them somewhat better at the job. I think one of the big concerns around credit rating agencies prior to this regulated environment was the fact that they were not really accountable for the verdicts that they issued. But at the same time also there were problems about conflict of interest, because these were private organizations that were often not only just privately funded, but also issuers and product providers had to pay for a rating, and that's where the issue of independence comes from. It doesn't really, but there are now controls in place. For example, you're not allowed to issue a rating on an organization in which you've got more than a 10% stake, or that constitutes more than 10% of the income of the ratings agency. So a few things like that. Conflicts of interest always exist. It's about being transparent about it and how do you actually manage that. So I think purely from that point of view, we're much better off than we were 6-7 years ago. I think the other very important issue around credit ratings agencies also also is that I think they have started to take more responsibility for the impact that their ratings and their issues have. And I think that is a very healthy situation also. As much as the industry who uses the credit ratings should not place excessive reliance on those ratings, at the same time, these CRAs also can't operate in a vacuum and almost disregard the potential impact that their ratings and how they sort of communicate those ratings also have on the industry as a whole.
I mean, Mark, we look at it, South Africa teetering on the brink of a potential ratings downgrade, which takes us to this dastardly thing called junk bond status, which means we become something of an investment basket case. How much pressure does that put on you as the chief executive of one of the big four ratings agencies in this country?
Well, from our perspective, it's, pressure is something that we just have to deal with, but it needs to be managed. From our perspective also, we accord internal sovereign ratings. So we actually rely on the big three who are proficient in the international space to accord the sovereign ratings. From that perspective, we're somewhat fortunate that we don't have to deal with the pressure of potentially politicians and finance ministries, etc.
Okay, so when you look at what the job that they have to do, it's one of those things, thereby by the grace of God go they. How much pressure are they under? Because I remember Pravin Gordhan, I was once interviewing one of the heads of the ratings agencies in South Africa, and Pravin Gordhan tore a complete strip of him in public, and it was, it was a very public dressing down. Pravin Gordhan was good at those. I don't know whether Nerina has yet developed the same level of grumpiness when it comes to ratings agencies, but I'm sure he will. That dynamic is one that's got to be very carefully managed, because you've got global clients, you've got an investment community, and in between you've got the country that you're judging.
Absolutely. Look, I think one also needs to look at the fact that the regulation now, there's stringent applicability in terms of the rating analytical unit. There's stringent oversight of board of directors. There's requirements for independent board members to monitor the development of ratings. For the analytical unit to essentially disclose everything that is discussed at rating panel meetings. Everything's sufficiently documented and minuted. Each person's individual rating vote is captured. So while there's pressure from one perspective, there is also necessity to accurately document everything internally in the event that there is some level of accountability. So I think from that perspective, it's a lot more transparent. And unfortunately, those aspects are never going to go away. But I think the process is really just managing and eliminating as much of that pressure as possible.
You know the big three, you know the pressure they're under, you know the country, you know it well, you live here, you work here. What are they likely to be doing in the next 18 months in terms of South African ratings?
I think from S&P's perspective, I think they've made it clear recently that they're likely to maintain a stable outlook for the foreseeable future, but they do have concerns around the GDP growth prospects. Should that deteriorate materially, I think there may be some action, albeit highly unlikely. I think Fitch is the potential outlier because they're a notch higher than S&P. They have a negative outlook on the country. They have indicated that they will be reviewing the rating in June this year, and I think there's a good possibility that they would take it down to BBB minus and align it to S&P.
Okay, so then we get to that one notch above junk, right?
Correct.
What about Moody's?
Moody's are currently at BBB and on stable outlook, and I don't think there's any indication from their office that there's going to be any likely rating action, but you just don't know. I mean, it's obviously very difficult for me to comment on what Moody's perspective is, but there's always that possibility.
Nerina, we look at it. Fundamentally, South Africa's got, we call them challenges. Growth slowing dramatically, electricity crisis, a national electricity provider which doesn't seem to know its backside from its elbow right now, courtesy of a war room aboard, a government department, and everybody else who's got a vague interest in it wanting to meddle. That's got to be the biggest risk we face as a country right now in terms of these agencies.
Absolutely, and I think the focus should not be on how do we avoid a change in our credit rating
How do we
status.
fix the problem?
Exactly,
Yeah.
that should be the key thing. So I think this excessive focus on what is the outcome going to be is the wrong focus. The focus should really be on what do we do to fix this? Because let's go back again, what is the purpose of them? To assess what is the credit worthiness or the ability of the issuer to actually service that debt. So what is the ability of the South African government to continue paying the coupons, the interest rate essentially on its bonds?
And 50 billion rand
Yeah.
is what we pay a year
And it'll be a lot
in interest.
more if there's a credit rating downgrade.
Absolutely.
So I think you also, from a credit rating agency point of view, you've got to ask yourself, what is the impact of a downgrade on the future ability then of that organisation to continue servicing its debt? And I think that is really an important point of view in terms of what is the impact of this dreaded terminology that we see bandied about, called junk status and investment grade status, for example. I think we run the danger of assuming some sort of entire categorization purely because of a level of a rating, where the focus should be a lot more on what is the ability to actually repay that, and how do we ensure that we focus on what we need to do.
Marc Joffe won't nail his colours to the mast. What's your assessment of what the ratings agencies like to do over the next 18 months?
I certainly would expect Fitch to do because they're a notch above the rest, to bring it in line. Also, there's the difference between the rating and then the outlook.
Yeah.
So there's a scope for the outlook to be deteriorating without the actual rating being cut. I think the concern is that you see some preemptive investment flows in anticipation of what might come later on. I do also think that investment agencies and investment funds need to take some responsibility in terms of what they do with the information, not just the actual rating itself, but to actually take the trouble to look through the detailed analysis that the credit ratings agencies
Which is great, but when the herd is running,
yeah,
you join the herd.
No, sure. You don't necessarily have to join the herd. That's really where investment value is added, is being independent in thought and doing your own research and not relying excessively on an external party's view.
Nerina Visser, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
She is wearing
Thank you.
a Chartered Financial Analysts board hat this evening, and also to Marc Joffe, Chief Executive of Global Credit Ratings. Thanks for your expert inputs this evening. That was Tonight with Bruce Whitfield. Thank you so much for watching. There'll be more tonight tomorrow. Till then, bye-bye.